Welcome to Almost Here, Round the Corner Future Technology podcast with Richard Jacobs. Future technologies poised to transform our lives for better or worse are the focus of this podcast. Almost here means these technologies are now here and starting to be used, or just around the corner, from Bitcoin to artificial intelligence, 3D printing, blockchain, virtual reality, and more.
Hello, this is Richard Jacobs with the Future Tech Podcast. My guest is Professor Siegfried Hekimi. He's at McGill University, Department of Biology, and we're going to be talking about what he's doing in the Hekimi Lab, dealing with aging and stress and the biology of it all. So, Professor, how are you doing?
I'm doing fine. How are you doing?
Yeah,
and
good.
It's pot legalization day today in Canada. Special day.
Oh, well, tell me about that briefly. What is that, and what's that about?
Well, marijuana is legal now in Canada from starting today, sold in government shops.
Wow.
There you go.
So after the podcast, are you going to run out and try some?
Well, you can buy it online too, but yes, it's going to be. People sometimes believe it's going to be a big sort of bring a big social change. Don't really believe that. People just going to get used to the fact that it's legal and won't make much of a difference.
Yeah, I've seen in the United States, and I've been in states where it's legal, and everything looks normal to me.
Yeah, exactly.
Nothing looks weird. There's no creatures running the streets or crazy things happening. So
exactly. There you go.
Yeah, well, that's good. Good. Well, I'm glad. So tell me about your lab and your work there. What's that about?
Yeah. So, we've been working now for close to 30 years on the biology of aging by using both nematode Caenorhabditis elegans, a small worm, but 1 millimeter long, who lives on petri dishes, which is very practical to study aging because it doesn't live very long, and we can do good genetics. But we also moved into using mice, and then using human cells and developing drugs. So we try to kind of pass from very basic discoveries about aging using genetics to attempt to actually act on aging by drug development. And that's what we've been doing, for a long time.
Okay.
With some, our earliest thing, how we got into that is because I discovered, even when I was still, before I had my lab, a postdoc in Cambridge, England, mutants that are long-lived. And I was one of the very first to find such mutants. And our mutants were special, or rather different from the few other mutants which were already known at the time, which is they seem to affect, metabolism, mitochondrial function, things like oxidative stress, that is the potential damage by free radicals, and these sort of things. These have remained unique mutants to study this question in aging, and it had allowed us to do something which was unexpected, and I see as one of the things which was fun to do some paradigm shifting, some fighting dogma, is that we found that so-called reactive oxygen species, or what people sometimes call free radicals, which can produce oxidative stress, and people very much, if you ask people in the street, believe maybe it's a cause of aging, or many people believe it's the cause of aging. This is why they consume antioxidants, they buy antioxidants. Actually, free radical damage does not cause aging, and almost to the contrary, free radical increases aging because it helps the body to fight aging. And that was a very interesting finding, and a lot of our efforts now. Go ahead.
I'm a little bit confused. So,
yeah,
free radicals, they cause aging, or they help stop aging, or
they help stop aging. People there's the so-called oxidative stress theory of aging, which has been around for a long time, which still suggests that free radicals cause aging. And it's based on a number of not unreasonable ideas. One of them, for example, is that when the older an animal or the shorter lived an animal, a species, the more you see elevated level of free radicals. When you get older, you have more free radical generation in your cells. And this has been interpreted, although this is just a correlation, it has been interpreted as being meaning that free radical cause aging. And what I believe we have been convincingly able to show is that no, free radical increase because they're part of a system to recruit defenses against the damage caused by aging. And that's why it's correlated with aging. And we have been able, for example, to show that we can increase free radical generation in our model animal species and prolong the lifespan rather than shorten it. Okay, and we've been able to show something similar for mitochondrial dysfunction. Free radical, one of the places where they're produced is in mitochondria, which produce energy in the cells. And people have always believed that maybe damage to mitochondria from free radicals or from other causes is also causal to aging, because of course you need to make energy, you need your ATP for everything. But we've been able to show that clearly the level of damage that you see during aging in mitochondria does not cause aging, and even more profound damage does not cause aging. And here too, there's some indication that maybe lowering energy production, which lowers the rate of all the processes in the cell, might actually help to live longer, to accumulate maybe some molecular damage for a longer time.
Well, how can you show that free radicals help aging instead of?
Because, for example, because if you can take a normal animal, a non-mutant animal, and give them products that increase, drugs that increase free radical, and this makes the animal live longer. Alternatively, or another type of experiment we've done, we have mutants, where the mutations cause a damage. There's a mutation makes mitochondria function differently, so that they actually produce more free radical. And not only do these mutants, in fact, live longer than normal animals, but when you treat these long-lived mutants with antioxidants, they now live as short than normal animals. So all these sort of experiments and more suggest
what
that.
What do you think is the mechanism by which more free radicals would help an animal live longer?
Good question. So free radicals, you see them as toxic, but they're really only potentially toxic, because in the body, in cells, they're produced by various processes, and there is also a lot of very excellent defenses against too much free radical, or against the potential damage free radical can produce, because they are reactive. Just like in your cell, there are mechanisms which prevent too much calcium accumulation, so that the cell doesn't become calcified, or many other things. So free radicals are produced by cells, and they are under very good control in cells. Doesn't mean that if you have too much, it's not damaging, but that's only potential. In cells, free radicals are used as signaling messengers. So they're just like, I was giving the example of calcium or other things, they're intracellular messenger molecules, which help the cell maintain homeostasis by talking between compartments, etc. And in this role as messenger molecules, and nothing about the potential toxicity, that they're actually acting in pathways that help combat aging. And we've,
so they're making communication more efficient between the different parts of a cell?
Yes, or maybe not a question of more efficient, it's more like it almost seems that the free radical communication, you're right, is specifically involved in the sort of pathway that will bolster a cell's ability to maintain its homeostasis, to survive, to resist shocks, etc. It's as if, this sort of mechanism, for some reason, particularly needs this sort of communication. So it's even better than you having overall a cell that works better. It's like the way it works better is precisely, it seems, for the sort of damage which we can observe occurs during our aging. So again, that's why we believe that's why there's this correlation that the more aged you are, the more free radical you have. It's not because the free radical causes the aging. It's because when you age, you need more free radical generation in the cell's attempt to constantly combat whatever damage accumulates because of the aging process.
So you think it could be actually detrimental to try to take supplements or do things that would reduce your free radicals?
Picked on that, absolutely. So the good news is that probably most antioxidants that people buy and consume don't really work as antioxidant in your body. Okay, they don't really change much the redox state. And the other good news is that even when they do work, again, the body has very good mechanism to maintain its redox level, which means the balance between electrons bound and free are at a set level. So the antioxidant won't do too much. But yes, they're potentially toxic, and it's very hard to see, because imagine, say, you're taking antioxidant and this increases your aging rate by a few percent, which certainly you don't want. This might be a few years, right? But there's really no experiment or clinical trial you could easily do which could demonstrate that, okay? I mean, it would mean that you'd have two groups. I mean, not just ethically, but just practically and cost-wise, you can't really do this trial, okay? So when a compound you can buy over the counter or has been shown or has not been shown to not be acutely toxic, then you take it. And if it's only chronically toxic, you don't know about it. And given that it seems that, and there's been lots of in the study which has nothing to do with us, which people have shown that consuming antioxidant has no beneficial effects. And forget that we have reason to believe it might even be bad, right? But certainly has no beneficial effect. Then it's kind of tragic that people spend a lot of money, and we're talking in the developing world, it might be like a sensible fraction of the money they spend for food, on antioxidant, because they have been convinced by public opinion and now the industry of antioxidants and whatever, and nutritional supplements in general, that they should do that. That's good for their health. And as far as anybody knows nowadays, it doesn't do anything good and might even do something bad.
Yeah, I've seen tons of advertising for years. I think that too, that you want to reduce free radicals, and
Well,
you said slowing down some of the metabolic processes appears to lengthen the life of various creatures. I've learned about calorie restriction as a possible mechanism for that, but what other mechanisms could cause machinery to slow down?
Right. So calorie restriction, it's not clear that it actually slows anything down. And to my mind, though opinions might differ, I don't think we know how calorie restriction works, meaning why in some strains, because in some mouse strains, for example, where it works very well, calorie restriction can have such a big effect on lifespan, meaning increasing it. It's not entirely clear that it's by slowing down metabolism or doing something more twisted than that, okay? But the other the mechanism we've been studying, where we've seen that, is simply a mechanism where the mitochondria function at a slower rate. So they actually consume food more slowly and produce ATP more slowly. And somehow the cell can accommodate with this by slowing everything down. And in part, this seems to increase lifespan. It's interesting even for people, although there is currently no way to intervene, but because we don't know that the thing we're interested in, say at which rate we are thinking or feeling or whatever, is directly influenced by our metabolic rate. There are probably big differences of there's sufficient differences of metabolic rate between people. Some people have very energetic lives and others less so, and it doesn't seem to change anything to their mental state. So maybe even for people, there's a possibility to slow down their overall metabolism. It might make them slower walking up the stairs, but who cares, And this might be good for the lifespan, but again, definitely not demonstrated for people, or even not well demonstrated for mice,
Well, you've been doing this for 30 years, so what are some of the really interesting, you mentioned it already that, free radicals may actually, be assistive in the aging process. Yeah. What other surprises or things have you found that either run contrary to common knowledge or are just interesting? What have you figured out in the puzzle of aging that you think is important?
Right. In a way, I address that by saying it's these two things really. It's been very initially if you go back to the start, the simple fact that we could have mutant strains of worms, but never mind worms, where we changed, for example, only 2 base pairs in the entire genome, right? Changing 2 amino acids in 2 proteins, yet you can have an animal to now live 5 times longer than the normal animal for 2 base pair changes in the entire genome. Well, that was a real biological surprise. My evolutionary colleagues here at McGill, they teach our papers just for this fact, because people had this notion that aging is the ultimate multifactorial thing, and it was a purely quantitative thing. And the fact that we can actually change an animal's function to such a degree in terms of aging by changing almost nothing in the structure of the animal, even though we don't completely understand how this then brings about such a long lifespan, but the simple fact that you can, that was definitely a surprise. And then there was a surprise later to find that mutants that damage mitochondrial function, right, which make it worse and increases free radical. I mean, we were discussing earlier that make mitochondria work less well and damage and increase free radical doesn't make you live short, but makes you live long. That was the next surprise, and then, as we discussed earlier, we studied that until we understood what was actually going on, and that was interest. And that's definitely been, I would say, the biggest surprises. Since then, it's not that there are not other things, but we all got used to the fact that aging can be studied, like when we study development, by using genetics, by using model systems, by intervening with drugs. In a way, we've been used to that. But in the early days, this was new that you could do this on a feature such as aging. That was quite exciting.
So animals living 5 times longer, that's a huge change. It's not just 10% longer, but 5 times is incredible.
Yes.
What was different about these animals? You said they had a base pair switched, but what else did you notice? About them? What made them different?
One thing is these animals, which had such large effects, but it's not necessary. The one we studied also were slow, meaning the rate of living and all the sorts of things you would mind to measure was slow. But this is not necessarily the case. You can obtain very large increases in lifespan with animals which seem to be functioning at the same sort of rate than normal animals. And as I said earlier, opinions vary. Some people think they know what's going on or whatever, but I think we don't really understand what changes allow this. It's because we don't really understand what the cause of aging is. And when I say we don't understand the cause of aging, what I mean to say is the proximal or physiological cause of aging. What is it that really gets damaged and cannot be repaired properly? Okay, some people believe it's not like that. It's a program. Aging is like development. There is something ticking, okay, and when it ticked X time, then you die. But I think the evidence for this is very weak, and aging still very much looks like an accumulation of damage. The problem here is we don't know what that damage is. And that's one of the reasons people love the oxidative stress theory of aging, because then we had the impression that we knew what the damage is. It's free radical damage, okay? And that's what accumulates, and there's more and more damage and can't all be repaired, and now the thing falls apart. But it's not clear at all that this is the case, and so we don't know what the damage is. To go back to free radical damage, you might have heard of your naked mole rats, which are a rodent model of animals which live a very, very long time, and has been studied by a number of people, and it's now studied also by McGill Lab, the Google company who works on aging. And naked mole rats are interesting because they are the size of mice, but they live 10 times longer than mice, and their steady state, the basal level of free radical generation and damage is much higher than mice. Another demonstration or proof that free radicals certainly do not even correlate well with aging per se, let alone what role they play. But again,
if you look,
don't know why. Go ahead.
If you look longitudinally at a normal animal versus a mutant animal, have you looked at the rates of damage over time to the mitochondria, for instance, and have you looked at the condition of cells, and are you able to do a side-by-side comparison?
It's a good question. It kind of scales. So people have looked little of that because it's harder than you think. In terms of standardizing everything and having a measure you can truly believe. But essentially, for these mutants who live a very long time, we kind of it sort of scales. It's not like suddenly you're seeing something that never happens at all, right? It just happens at the equivalent time of their lifespan, say at 50% of their lifespan, even if it's a longer lifespan. You see the same level of damage, etc. So we haven't identified what is not going wrong specifically, because everything seems to be just scaling. And it kind of makes sense because, think about human disease. If you were to, and it's already happening a little bit, right? If you prevent people of dying from heart disease and cancer, then they live a little bit longer and all die from neurodegenerative diseases. So if you want people to live 2 times longer, then you have to affect all diseases in parallel, right? Otherwise, you'll just be killed by the next one, even if it normally starts a bit later, So you have only very small increments. Is to obtain a very large increase in lifespan. Therefore, you need to really touch the basic mechanism of aging, and this seems to what we have done in this mutant, even if we don't know what this basic mechanism is and how come in the mutant. Therefore, it allows for longer lifespan.
So,
yeah.
Is a hard question.
We don't always have the answer. Most of the research you do is to create a question, right? So.
That's true. So things follow a certain trajectory and a path, but they follow it just at different time scales. You're saying in the mutants,
that's right.
Like the same things happens in the mutants. It just happens over a longer time period.
That's right, and therefore something must be happening more slowly in the mutant, which is the basis of it all, and we don't understand what that is. Some people think they understand.
Do you understand? I mean, I guess what I would do is study different parts of the trajectory, and I'm sure people are doing this, but is there any insight at different stages of the trajectory on what's going on, or is it just the whole thing a mystery?
One thing is the question of the trajectory. I am not aware that people have found that, special things happen at special times in the long-lived mutants, okay? Meaning, it's all to do that, when they're young, there's no damage, and then the damage starts later and so on. A little bit, but it's not quite clear. Maybe calorie restrictions a bit like that, meaning that, the animals stay younger for long and then start aging at the same rate as normal animals. But for the mutants which affect mitochondrial function, for example, it's more like during the entire lifespan, for any interval, they have aged less, But this doesn't give you a mechanistic insight of what it is that's not getting damaged. What forces that actually causal to aging is happening more slowly. There are hypotheses. So, for example, one hypothesis is that it's epigenetic, right? So our cells have very complex regulation to function. Some of them we know and others we don't know. And there's a whole level of feedback mechanism with 18 different, loops which all support each other, which allows the cell to function optimally, okay? And maybe some of these are labile. So when you build them, when you make a new organism, all fresh from an intact cell, during development, it's all in place. And then slowly these things fall apart in a way which is not instantaneous, but you slowly lose a little bit of regulation, etc. And there is no good way to rebuild it de novo while maintaining the organism alive. And I know it's a bit hand waving, but something like that's going to be hard to study. Every cause of aging is hard to identify because you're always going to have the problem of a cause and effect, because everything seems to become less well regulated with aging. Therefore, when you find something that's less well regulated and you say this is causal to aging, it might just be a consequence of aging and not a cause. So it's just hard to say.
The animals where you did the genetic engineering and switched the base pairs so they live longer, did you do that when they were embryos, or did you do that when they were already adults?
That doesn't make a difference. So it's for the whole. No, so these animals, we're talking about viable strains. There's no problem. They are mutants forever, and they produce mutant progeny which live long. Everybody lives long. It's not a development versus adult change thing. But the truth is, it's being said that people, at least for some of these mutants, have tried to turn off or alter the function of the gene only in adults, and it still increases lifespan a lot. So it's not purely developmental setting or something. It's actually something that acts throughout.
But again,
and that's true also for increased free radicals.
Was it an adult animal that you did gene therapy on, or was it an embryo that you did gene therapy on that was born and lived
Originally,
longer?
we didn't do gene therapy. Originally, we just identify mutants which have random mutations, and then you find a mutant which has a certain property, say long life. But the mutation was produced randomly by giving them mutagen. Nowadays, we have CRISPR. Well, that was a very exciting development in terms of technology. We have CRISPR, we can engineer this mutation. But originally, we just identified mutants which were produced spontaneously and then went and looked what was the mutation which gave the properties we were looking at.
But now that there's CRISPR, what have you done? Have you tried it on adult animals?
Yeah. So with CRISPR, absolutely. We're using CRISPR routinely because CRISPR is beautiful because it allows you to speed up a lot of that. It allows you to use much more of the background information you already have about how cells function to play with very, very precisely with some processes and therefore to have much more high resolution experiment. So I can, for example, give you an example. As we explained earlier, we believe that free radicals are regulatory molecules and signaling molecules. But to do this, they have to modify some proteins, and they do this on modifying the amino acid cysteine. Okay, they oxidize the amino acid cysteine on protein X, and then this protein can change its function because it's modified by the free radical, and this represents a signal. So what we can do with CRISPR, what we have done, is to replace the cysteine with a very similar amino acid, a serine, but it cannot be oxidized. So now the molecule whose function is maybe changed from free radical becomes deaf to any free radical signaling, and we look at the consequences. And we did this, for example, with the oncogene RAS, which we shown to be sensitive to free radicals and might be even involved in the ability of free radicals to increase lifespan, and have very interesting results. We can also change the cysteine to an aspartic acid, which mimics being oxidized. So all this, one amino acid at a time change in one protein, which really allows, great precision in the hypotheses you're testing. Kind of decreases the hand waving a little bit.
But yeah, again, have you tried the gene therapy on young animals and old animals and middle-aged animals? And if so, what have you seen happen if you introduce the gene therapy at different ages?
I'm not sure I understand. It essentially makes no difference. But it's not really the way it works. You're not actually, I know you're thinking about humans where people hope to use CRISPR on a particular tissue, say muscle, and then, they repair something in muscle and so on. But when you do this for experimental animals, you do it if you want, in the germline. You modify the germline of one mother in order that it produces progeny that's already mutant for the change you want to engineer. So it's always the whole animal doing its whole lifespan. Okay, what you're thinking of is more like when people want to use CRISPR, for example, to cure specific diseases which are already present in somebody who has a genetic problem, and it has been shown, for example, for muscular dystrophy, where then you try to use CRISPR right away on the muscle to repair something. What we're talking about here is more like a technological way to engineer mutant animals which are mutant from birth.
Oh, so you haven't tried to do gene therapy on an adult animal to turn it into a mutant?
No, it wouldn't know how to do it really.
It wouldn't work?
It would be very difficult because imagine you would need to be able to target virtually all its cells. What you can do is having, a little subset of cells, one particular tissue, one cell type, and even that's hard because then you have to be able to target it to get the whatever produces the CRISPR in there, only there, right? But that's what, again, some people try for some diseases, but for this sort of studies, we haven't tried that. I'm not sure it's easy to do.
Okay, got it. So what's next for your lab? What's coming in the near future that you're going to be working on?
Yeah.
Where's
so
the experimentation going to go from here?
We are doing as I said, some of these studies using CRISPR to dissect things at the single amino acid level of how free radicals help rather than damage, And the other big thing we're doing is we're doing drug development in the space of mitochondrial diseases and how mitochondrial dysfunction, when it's too severe, produces disease, but maybe if it was much less severe, would actually be beneficial. So that you can't just go and say, well, we want only to boost it or we want only to decrease it. You have to find the sweet spot. And we are doing a lot of drug discovery also in a particular space, which is the space of Coenzyme Q, ubiquinone, which is a lipid-like molecule which is necessary for mitochondrial electron transport, and for which there are some people who have ubiquinone deficiencies. They lack the ability to make normal amounts of this molecule, and we're having mouse models and drug screened for this, and we've been successful in actually finding a compound which helped to absorb ubiquinone, which is very, I'm sorry, I'm using some terms interchangeably. Ubiquinone, coenzyme Q, CoQ10 is all the same thing, just different names for it. And so these are molecules that's very hard to absorb, and we found a way to boost this a lot, and actually trying to start a spin-off. I had a spin-off company like 15 years ago for about 10 years from our work here on aging, and now on this particular field of ubiquinone deficiency, we also trying to get a spin-off starting for drugs we've already discovered, while at the same time finding new ones.
So it seems like aging is a programming of our genetics. It seems like we just don't understand maybe the mechanism, but there's a whole orchestration that comes from our genes that sets in motion these events that cause us to age, or all creatures to age, is what it seems like.
I don't know. I don't think so. I think it's a secondary effect. It's not like programmed to happen. It's more like neglect. Okay, so right, it's not like there is a little program or machinery that makes you age. It's just that the machinery that prevents you from aging, meaning what is aging in that sense, falling apart slowly, okay, is not perfect. It's not optimal. It's clearly there, because if I kill you, each of your cells is going to fall apart a lot faster than it falls apart while you're alive, okay? So there's a machinery that prevents you from falling apart. But what you're suggesting is that there's a machinery that makes you fall apart. And I'm not sure there's any evidence for that.
Okay.
So what we want to do is what we would want to do in a big view thing is always to find what makes things fall apart, or what things fall apart first, or more crucially, and then boost the machinery that makes it fall apart slowly to make it fall apart even more slowly, okay? Rather than blocking the machinery that makes you fall apart, because I don't think there is a machinery that makes you fall apart. There's just a machinery that prevents you from falling apart, and it's not working well enough.
All right, that makes sense.
What you're trying to find,
Well, what's your gut tell you? How many different types of machinery and how many different places is the machinery being used to prevent you from falling apart?
So some people believe, it's just entropy, which means that everything falls apart in parallel. So there's really no specific mechanism in cells that you can address, because they all fall apart in parallel. Okay. Even if you say that, and I don't like that theory just because it's very hard to test, and I think untestable things are not that interesting. Okay? But nonetheless, even if you say that, then still mitochondria might be the place to act, because it's still true that two functions a cell use. We're talking thermodynamics here. Two functions a cell needs energy, and if it's just slowly falling apart by entropy, if you give it less energy and the cell can still function but more slowly, it might still allow it to fall apart more slowly by entropy. But I think there is also reasons to believe that it's not true that everything falls apart, and that there's some thing which are harder to maintain than others, which then secondarily, becomes deleterious for the whole cell. And we can still try to identify that. And the experiments I was telling you about earlier, for example, that we can have animals that live a lot longer than normal animals by changing very few things in them, suggest that maybe there's not that many things that need changing. Or that you can fix a few things and then secondarily it'll fix a lot. Okay, that there's something more fragile to aging, if you want to something fall apart more quickly than others, and then just pull the others behind them, and then if you intervene on these, then we have a chance to slow things down. Okay. This is a somewhat theoretical consideration, in the absence of really understanding the mechanism. But what everybody does is always a mixture of trying to have new concepts, new ideas, and yet in some more empirical kind of trying to find a drug that works, and you kind of worry later on how it works. Okay, if you're having a good screening mechanism for such a drug, then finding the drug would be a first step, and then which you then can use to find out what does the drug do. So one always does a little bit of both.
Is it possible right now for people to do genetic engineering, even though it probably wouldn't be allowed, but to do genetic engineering so that the children that they would have would live a lot longer than normal people?
I don't think we know what to change to do this. So I just don't think the knowledge is there to do that, even if people wanted to try. I wouldn't know what to change, and be confident this is going to be good rather than bad. Okay, I don't think there is.
Right, well, you wouldn't want people creating a race of long-lived superhumans.
Well, they wouldn't be superhuman. No, come on. Okay, that's something worth talking about. This is a misconception. The misconception is the following. Sometimes people tell me, well, but if people live longer, then we have a problem for resources on the planet and so on. But demography, how many people are around and any place at any given time, is almost entirely driven by birth rate and not by death rate. So when you increase lifespan by people by 15%, which would be a lot, right? People would pay for that, a lot, okay? This is nothing, that's 15% compared to now people in Canada have 1.2 children rather than 17 previous generation, okay? That changes how many people are around, not if you make the people who are there live a little longer. So I don't think that, there is anything known, the sort of effect you can hope for in our effort to understand aging and intervene pharmacologically, say, it's not the same order of magnitude than when really changes the population structure, which is all to do with birth rate.
It might actually have a reverse effect if it happened, because then people would be in no rush to have children. They may put it off forever, and so maybe actually, who knows what it would do.
It's actually, you're making another interesting point here. People now, actually in westernized countries, everywhere but much more in westernized countries, have children much later. And this, in fact, creates an evolutionary selection pressure for still being healthy enough, especially for women, to be capable of having children, okay? Which means that on the long run, this will make people live longer, because only those who are still physiologically young at the age where they have children will have children, or rather they will have more children. And so this delay in the time of first reproduction might actually, in terms, at a relatively long time scale, but at the level of the species, make people live longer, That's sort of an interesting consideration. Another consideration while we're speaking of that is that, we're talking about intervening and maybe making people healthier. But the biggest effect on lifespan you can imagine has already happened, which is that people live 3 times longer on average than 2 centuries ago. Okay, so your environmental condition, meaning your lifestyle, how hard you work, how well you feed, how warm you're in the winter, cool in the summer, all of it. This has a large effect on your lifespan. We are living a long time. I'm 62, and I'm in unbelievably good shape. 2 centuries ago, I would have terrible, and probably would be dead, actually, probabilistically, And
right.
This is really how easy my life has been, and still is. Easy being a general concept. But all these things which protect us from harm, from physical stress in one form or another, actually allow us to live long. And this is a huge effect. This is an effect like the one we discussed earlier. This is a threefold effect. It's huge. And this is still continuing. So in Canada, for example, the average lifespan is still increasing linearly and with no appearance of stopping. There you go.
And how fast a rate does it appear to be increasing?
Don't know, but because I don't have it on top of my head. But what I see in my head is the line. It's just a straight line for now. It doesn't seem to be, flattening out. So it's increasing quite a bit, and I think I don't know. I don't want to give a silly number, but as I just said, people now life expectancy is above 80. Okay, well, definitely wasn't that. I'm pretty sure it's like at least 20 or 30 years per century. That's a lot.
Okay. Well, very good. I mean, I could ask you questions for a long time, but I think we're out of time. So, what's the best way? What's the best way for people to get in touch and to ask questions? Oh,
it's email for sure.
Would you be okay to give that email?
Yeah, I can give that email. No problem. I mean, it's Siegfried.Hekimi@McGill.ca. So on your site, it's easy to have it.
Well, very good. Any last thoughts before we wrap up?
No, not really. I said a lot. So there you go.
All right, Professor. Thanks for coming. I really appreciate you being on the podcast.
You're welcome. It was fun. Okay. Bye. Good day.
You have been listening to Almost Here, Around the Corner Future Technology podcast with Richard Jacobs. Subscribe to this podcast, post a review to discover more future technologies that are poised to transform our lives for better or worse, such as Bitcoin, artificial intelligence, 3D printing, blockchain, virtual reality, and more.